Good afternoon, everyone. Prioritizing students' mental health has always been at the forefront of providing holistic student support on college campuses over the last decade. And this focus is even more acute during the last 3 years. Turns out, politics, pandemics, perhaps other triggers, we're only just starting to understand the way in which culture is shifting and shaping the humans that sort of comprise that culture. And I'm really excited today to talk a little bit about all of this. My very first role was as a graduate student more than 25 years ago. I'm Paul McLaughlin, the Vice President and Dean of the college today. And since those 25 years of serving as the Assistant Director of University of Vermont's Health and Wellness Center, so much has changed around the topic of mental health and even health and wellness on college campuses. In those days, we were talking about safer sex practices. We were focused on smoking cessation. We were talking about eating healthily and physical activity. Regarding mental health, that was sort of a newer space for us. And we were working to destigmatize mental health seeking, and we were helping to educate educators who were beginning to see the impacts of soldiers returning from Operation Desert Storm. Sort of amazing to think about those early times. As a result of this panel, I thought, gosh, what was I doing at the University of Vermont's Health and Wellness Center? It's so different from what we do and think about today on college campuses. But getting students to seek mental health care was our focus then, and it continues to be today. Even more than 2 decades later, we have made progress on some fronts in terms of destigmatization, but we face new challenges on countless other fronts. I am really excited that you've joined us here. I know there was a lot of competition for this time slot and a really beautiful day that you've given up for an hour for this really important conversation. Certainly, as again, a lot has changed around mental health care and our understanding that mental health care is health care. The headlines, on the other hand, suggest things have never been worse. In just one publication, the Chronicle for Higher Education, which is the trade publication that my faculty and staff colleagues focus on, and it's certainly the kind of higher education sector publication, the headlines are deeply concerning. They, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and really any other popular news media outlet today, is filled with concerns about mental health. Not only for students, but I think more recently a recognition for faculty and staff who work with our students. Here are just a few examples in just the last couple of weeks. More colleges are hiring crisis response teams for mental health emergencies. Colleges turn to students' peers for mental health support. It's definitely a crisis, says one, why women in college sports are struggling with mental health. Another, a crisis of student anxiety. And perhaps not surprisingly to any of us here today, did COVID break students' mental health? This afternoon, I am pleased that you have joined us to hear from an incredible panel of experts who will unpack some of what we're seeing on college and university campuses today across this country. They will help us better understand what we're seeing, what we know about this generation of students, and how we can support them, and hopefully how we can support ourselves and one another. You can read their biographies, perhaps you already have, in the program notes that you have in front of you, and I'll ask each of them to talk a little bit about their work as they begin today's conversation. We really do, though, want this conversation to be informative, informal, and hopefully even inspiring. Before I exit the stage and pass it along to my colleagues, Dr. Don LaFrance and Dr. Ellen Larson, and our invited panelists, Dr. Toller, Dr. Courtney Tracy, and Dr. Mariel Buqué, did I say that? Buqué? I want to share one observation with you. I can say confidently that as one of the 2 co-chairs of Colgate's COVID task force, these last 2 years have been an extraordinary experience for students, really for all of us. But consistently, our students have impressed us by what they were able to do during such an unprecedented time in America. Indeed, an unprecedented time on college campuses, especially those who remained open during the pandemic. Our students rose to the challenges day after day as they changed, time and again. And so I'm sure our panelists will talk about whether COVID broke students' mental health, as that one headline asks, or whether It laid the groundwork for a deeper recognition, a deeper resilience, and an awareness of what we need from one another and how we can work together to accomplish extraordinary things. As students and we look backward and the image of the pandemic pressures fade further into the rearview mirror, will this be a moment that we see as a profound resilience building, and when our understanding of the importance of being together in community was strengthened? I'm excited to listen into today's conversation, and I'm happy to pass it over for you to unpack some of that for us. Thanks again for being here, and thank you for coming this afternoon.
Thank you. So as Dean McLaughlin discussed, well, first of all, I am the Assistant Vice President of Counseling and Psychological Services. I'm Dr. Dawn LaFrance, and I've been here at Colgate for over 20 years. I love the work that I get to do with college students every day, and it brings me a lot of satisfaction. But as Dean McLaughlin discussed, mental health concerns have been on the rise among college students, and our data indicate that this is especially the case in terms of anxiety, trauma, and mood disorders. Students are having difficulties managing their emotions and developing interpersonal effectiveness. Colgate, like many other colleges, is taking the mental health needs of our students very seriously. We are integrating our health and wellness practices so that Dr. Ellen Larson and I work closely with other departments to approach students' health in a holistic framework. We offer walk-in hours each day at the Counseling Center in order to provide students with easy access to mental health professionals. Counselors go into spaces where other students might spend their time, such as athletics, the Office of Undergraduate Studies, the Office of International Student Services. And we do this in order to build relationships and to destigmatize seeking help. We offer suicide prevention frequently, have psychiatric care available for students for their medication options, and we continually work to destigmatize mental health issues through outreach, such as our wellness fair that just took place a couple of weeks ago right out here on the quad. This panel is an exciting part of this initiative, and we're joined here with some amazing guests, as you can read on their bios, in the hopes of raising awareness about mental health, destigmatizing the care-seeking behavior, and consider ways that we can all best support our students through these very formative Colgate years. We want to have an interesting, informative conversation about mental health. So what I'd first like to do is just ask our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and then I have a question to get things started. Okay, so maybe we can turn to you just for a moment.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Courtney Tracy. I'm known online as the Truth Doctor. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a doctor of clinical psychology. And online, I call myself the Truth Doctor, not because I know all of the truth and I know everything that you should know. It's because I am a psychotherapist with really severe mental health issues, and I tell the truth about those. And as I do that, my goal is to help you be able to tell the truth about what you're experiencing so that you can doctor, meaning teach or heal, whatever it is that you need to in your life for yourself or for anyone else in it.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ellen Larson. I am the Director of Student Health Services. I'm a Colgate graduate from 1994, and I'm also the parent of a college freshman and a college senior. And so in terms of a lot of what that generation has experienced in COVID, I have watched happen in front of me. But in addition to that, working here, I've spent much of the last year and a half building an extremely strong relationship with a telepsychiatry group referred to, calls themselves Mantra Health, in order to help build access for psychiatric prescribing care for students here on campus. So.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Mariel Buqué, and I'm a licensed psychologist in the state of New York, and I'm also a trauma expert, so I specialize in the area of trauma. I specialize also in the area of intergenerational trauma, so the types of traumas that we actually transmit or hand down to our children by way of transmission genetically, and also by way of just the modeling behaviors, trauma responses, and things of that nature. And I'm also on social media, just by way of my name. And I share a lot of educational information around psychology. I also do corporate wellness consultancies, and I consult in different areas in media, just around trauma and around having conversations about trauma. So that's it.
Hi, my name is Lynn Toller. I'm a retired judge. I spent the last, 14 years on television, and I come to this mental health piece both personally and publicly. I've spent years trying to manage my own debilitating anxiety, and having done that, when I took the bench as a judge in Ohio in 1994, you just graduated. I don't even want to tell you how that makes me feel. They got a kid here and everything. But anyway, I found that on the bench, because I was a municipal judge, that people got into trouble not because they didn't know the law, understand the law, or want to obey the law, but they couldn't handle the emotionality of the moment. So from there, I spoke to them about all the emotional lessons my mother taught me to get me, and I used to reside in a closet because it was not safe to get out. And then I was on television, and I learned that from her. Those were my best moments on the bench. Then I tried to do a first responder mental health team for municipal courts, because a lot of people in jail are in jail simply because they are mentally ill and not because they are bad people, and they become sicker once they're there, and then we release them and wonder what the heck. And then once I got on television, I started talking about, yes, I see a psychiatrist, yes, I take medication, and yes, you should go too. You may not be medication, but let somebody just romp around in there once a year to make sure you're okay. So I am a woman who is all about the practice and procedure of living well, even in the midst of massive anxiety and the occasional depressive episode.
Okay, so we're going to have a really interesting conversation, and I invite the other panelists just to sort of jump in as we move forward. But I am going to start with a question for Dr. Mariel. Since we know that mental health issues, especially anxiety, has been on the rise over the last several years, I thought we could start with this topic. You've shared a lot online about anxiety and trauma specifically. Can you share with us any trends that you're noticing, specifically with the college age group, and the ways that maybe they're even talking about anxiety, and just what you're noticing about that population?
There's so much there. Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, there's so much because I think we're also really open as a society right now, much more than I've seen, especially when I first started my journey as a psychologist, in talking about mental health. So, I mean, like TikTok alone, right? Like TikTok is like a really big place for a lot of Gen Zs and beyond. And, you know, a lot of individuals are talking about anxiety itself, but also anxiety and depression, ADHD, the possibility that they might be a highly sensitive person, meaning that they have a high emotional capacity and they have like a lot of emotional sensitivities, right? There's also a lot of people that are wondering about whether or not they might have, they may be placed like on the autism spectrum. I mean, I think there's a lot of conversations, and it's great to have these conversations. I'm glad that they're open, you know, to the public, and that they're out there for information gathering. But I think it also builds a lot of anxiety because people are like, do I have this, or do I, you know? I'm sure that you get that a lot when people come to the center. But I think that, you know, something to consider is that it's important for us to have knowledge and then to utilize that knowledge to understand, okay, you know, maybe I'm a bit anxious, but to utilize that to understand then what to do with it, right? Because what tends to happen is that people just get labels, and then they live with those labels, and then they forget that there's a whole person behind that label. There's a whole person to consider beyond what you're identifying, beyond the anxiety, beyond the depression. What tends to happen when people, like, oftentimes just feel the depth of their anxiety or the depth of their depression is that they're only seeing what's the condition rather than seeing everything else around them. So I do see a lot of trends, especially for college-age kids and, you know, people that are emerging adults that are along all of those conditions mostly.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, Gen Z is called the generation of depression and anxiety. At least that's what you will find online for the most part, and that's certainly what we see on TikTok. I definitely have had sessions where people have come in, and on the first session they say, I think I have bipolar disorder because I saw this TikTok. And while that isn't necessarily the best thing to have happen. What is best is that they're questioning, that they're open to wondering, what is it that's going on within me? And like Mariel said, what are the solutions? I also think it's really unique that there's a major generational divide right now. Whether that's culturally, whether that's your opinion on politics or sexual orientation or gender roles, even taking all of that aside, the generations are so vastly different in terms of what we all experience. I think in my generation, being millennial, it still made sense for my parents at one point to say, back in my day, and to sort of judge how I was acting or behaving. But the thing is I don't think that there's any parent of Gen Z that can actually say back in my day, because it's so vastly different. They're the first generation to be born with the internet leading to massive amounts of information, whether that's doom scrolling because there's so much negative things going on in the news, or whether that's scrolling for distraction over 2 years of the pandemic, or the massive increase in social comparison because of social media. I mean, I remember my mental health deteriorating at 16 because I thought my plate of food that I posted didn't look as good as someone else's. That's what Instagram started as. It was just, here's a picture of my cat and my food. And now there's filters to alter your entire body to get a completely different face. And this generation is raised with that as part of their culture, and it's something so vastly different than I think any generation has ever experienced before.
Back in my day, I was born in the 50s, so, this is all very new to me. But the thing I would like to say about what's happening now that wasn't happening then is I'm on TikTok, I'm on all of those things as well. And because I am prone to anxiety and depression, what I have to do is fight it in the moment. I fight my feet and I adjust my algorithm. In other words, I have a tendency to watch these certain things. And then TikTok mines my depression and my upset and feeds it to me because I watch those long. So what I decide to do once a week is I adjust my feed. I look at only happy things, babies, elephants, whales, anything like that, because I want my feed to feed me what I need, not what I gravitate to. And so I know these new dangers are there, but there is not a new danger that you can present to me that I can't find a way to fight. And I think the one thing, if there's anything I can share to a generation who is dealing with something I never touched, is that there's always a way to fight it. And you have to figure out what it is. You have to figure out what your feed is telling you about where you look and what you do, and you have to figure out what takes you out of that feed. And I do at least 5 things every day, I don't care what's happening, to fight the anxiety so the feed and the foolishness can't get to me.
Love that. It's one of the things that I tend to say to folks when I'm working with them, that they need to step outside of the algorithm that's the doomed algorithm, right? Because it's always going to feed you the things that are going to feed the depression, and step into.
And it has to be a meaningful method aside to do.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This next hour, I'm adjusting my algorithm.
But you saying that is already a message for people to be like, oh, well, Judge Lynn told me. I gotta step outside of it.
Unlike my children, they may actually listen.
Well, it's because you stepped right into sort of the next theme that we were going to ask. I was going to look to you and really ask about ways to use social media to destigmatize mental health. So you've sort of stepped right into that, and even bigger, because we hear primarily negative. As parents, we're trained that social media is bad, right? Like, that's what we're taught, that's what we hear. And I just, in the last few months, have started hearing my oldest talk about what he's learning from TikTok, and I was like, oh, like, that's a whole new thing. So I would love to continue this discussion about the power of social media for good, and I love your change the algorithm, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that this is a great question, and I think, Judge Lynn, you've been on TV for so long, being a professional and being able to bring your profession to the public, and now it feels like there's the medical field, the mental health field, there's so many professions that are breaking down the barriers of what it means to be a professional and to help and serve the populations that they want to help and serve. So, and that's why I got on TikTok. I got on TikTok because I felt like I had a new message to share as a therapist. We're typically taught to be a blank slate. And when you go into a room with a therapist that's acting like a blank slate, that's acting like there's nothing wrong with them, to a degree, that probably doesn't make you feel the best. If you're going in for anxiety, you might be more anxious. If you're going in with depression, you might feel more depressed. Because the human mind compares. We have no ability to stop that. It's what helps keep us alive. But I feel like that's one of the amazing parts of it. There's teachers on there throughout the pandemic. There were teachers on there finding new ways to share information to get kids continue to be integrated and to care about education. And so, of course, I mean, for a long time, social media was very much for kids. You know, it was for the teenagers, it was for social interaction. And I said recently in one of my past keynotes that it's not really social media anymore, it's sort of becoming society media. We can find absolutely everything, every aspect of society online, not just the ability to socially interact. And I think that's just, it makes the internet so much more vast in terms of what it can have and the potential that it has to help people change.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I echo that wholeheartedly. I'm going to use that, by the way, from now on. I really love your take on society media a lot better. You know, and Dr. Courtney has like her own version of how she's expressed what therapy can look like on social media, and I'm sure that she could speak to that. During the pandemic especially, what I felt was like we were all so socially isolated, and everybody was like in this deep crisis, and I almost felt like I wanted to reach out from the screen and say, come, let's go to therapy. So I just started this thing called tea therapy, where I just like invite people to tea, and I say, come, let's have tea. And I just start a therapy session, and it's almost like I'm talking to the person. And the reason why I did that was because I wanted, one, for people to feel like they could hear a message in a different way, but also for people to feel like, you know what, this therapy thing, it's not that scary. It's actually okay. So if it can look a little bit like this, then I think I can do it. Because most often than not, people are just scared to go to therapy. They don't know what's going to happen, if they're going to be broken open, to the dean's point, right? You know, I mean, I think there's a lot of brokenness that we've experienced as a society, but I think people are just so tender right now. We are so tender. I am tender. As a clinician, I'm still very tender from everything that's happened in this world. And I think that has made it so that people are like, do I really want to touch these emotions? And in reality, when we don't, they get buried and they come back in other ways. And for students especially, they'll come back as brain fog, they'll come back as irritability, your social life is gonna suffer, the ways that your grades are gonna be impacted by that is gonna be pretty vast. And so the best thing to do is really to seek out help, to seek out these resources that you have, because I'm gonna tell you something, I'm really expensive. So when you go out there into the world and you're looking for me outside of a college, outside of a university, it's gonna cost a lot of money. So get the services here while they're free.
And there's really long wait lists out there in the community too.
5 months,
So
5 month wait list.
I guess I just want to jump in for a moment because since I found out I was going to be sharing this panel with such great experts, I started to watch a lot of the stuff that they have online. And just to put a plug out there, there's a lot of stuff to learn that you don't even have to go to a counseling session to learn about. So, for instance, a couple of you shared about anxiety management strategies. You could learn that one-on-one from a therapist, but it's also, there's some great information out there to help you think through some of that stuff. So one of the things that we would like to do at the Counseling Center is do some more research on what kinds of apps are out there so that we're really meeting the students where they are and what kinds of therapists and psychologists and other mental health clinicians are out there who we can trust to get them to follow, because then they don't have to wait for their counseling session, maybe to look up, hey, I had what I think was my first panic attack ever. What should I do about that? Well, if they've followed a couple people, then they can look through what they've already shared, and maybe they don't have to wait for that relief, and then maybe talk about it later also. But there is some good stuff there. I think you just have to sift through what is trustworthy and what is not sometimes. So,
yeah. I really like that point that you just made, that we can gain skills and strategies outside of the therapy session. I feel like that's something that social media has done, at least with a bunch of therapists coming on to. They've been on Instagram since about 2017, but TikTok really blew it up starting in 2020 because mental health was so stigmatized and because the conversation was supposed to be behind closed doors, one-on-one, keep it in the family even, now that it's becoming destigmatized, we're learning that these skills are not, there's no barrier to them. Breathing, we can all breathe, you know? We don't need to learn how to do a 4-point breath and pay $250 for that. It's something that we can practice on our own, and I think that that's one great thing about this younger generation is that they care. Like, this really matters to them. How does my mind work? How does my body work? I live in it every day, and they don't want to live another day of their life without feeling like they're actually in control of it, and that's something that I also really see. There's the culture on at least TikTok right now is so malleable by the younger generations. They decide what is important and what is not important. There are huge, massive cultural, political movements that actually take place through the TikTok communities. And so it's not just education from professionals either. It's just the generation, it's Gen Z wanting to help each other, wanting to make the world a better place. And I think, you know, Gen Z can give, you know, can diss the older generation sometimes, like, why did you guys not care about mental health in this way? But the thing is the foundation has been set because so many other things have been resolved. There's rights that have been given to so many people. There's politics that have been, well, they were worked out. Now we're kind of trying to figure it out, pretty divided these days. But now there's enough structure and stability to be able to take a look at mental health now. So I think that that's another important thing is there's space for it today. And they make the space. If it isn't somewhere, they'll make it. And I think that's really huge.
Generation of cycle breakers.
Yes.
The other thing I want to say about that is, if I were young and watching TikTok, I would feel powerless. And I think powerlessness just raises your anxiety level beyond. I mean, that's part of what happened with COVID. We didn't have the power. We were fighting something we couldn't see. Nobody knew what was happening. It was fluid. Everybody changed. It fell on a society that was, divided culturally, and so everybody had a wrong response. And I go on TikTok and I look at it stuff, and they're talking about stuff. Did you know in 1960, I was there in 65. That didn't happen. You know. So the thing is, I have the historical breadth not to believe most of it, and I think that to the extent that you're at college and you read and you do things, you have far more power than you know, far more power you believe, and the more you read about history and the things that we've been through, the more powerful you will feel about handling all of the frightened people on TikTok. And so I just want you to know how powerful you are, because you are.
Judge Lynn, can I follow up on that a little bit? So one of the things you talk a lot about is self-advocacy and figuring out systems and whatnot. Can you share some of your advice sort of broadly about self-advocacy and, if we're talking to parents of college students, how they can encourage their student to make sure they're getting their needs met?
Yeah. I mean, you just ask questions and be available for the response. What's happening with you? And then just keep going and going and going, and don't anticipate, and don't, just take whatever, just take whatever comes. And if you don't have judgment, they can speak openly, and don't be surprised. And it's just being willing to listen, and they know when you're willing to listen, and that's all I can recommend. Is just be willing to listen.
I love that so much. Can I piggyback off of that? Because I usually tell people to look in the mirror and say what need needs to be met right now. But I what's wrong with you? I like that way better. I'm gonna be doing that in the mirror because that just gave me a chuckle, and I mean it's so good, right? So I feel like intuitively some people just know, right? You don't need a therapy degree or anything. I feel like some of us just know, hey, I feel like something's up, and I need to do something about that. And if you have that feeling, I think it's about just listening to yourself, and really attending to that shift that you're seeing in yourself, and then deciding to do something about it. Don't just sit with it, right? But actually do something.
I have one more thing. So I want to talk a little bit about communication between parents and children. So one of the types of videos that I make on TikTok that are my most prominent ones and get a lot of feedback from parents and children is I play a parent and then I play a child. It's just me wearing a beanie as the child, or I'll play the therapist and the client. And what happens is I communicate the way that a therapist would communicate. And it teaches so objectivity, curiosity, compassion. And the comments I received is, I never thought about asking somebody after they come to me for advice, or if they come to tell me something, do you want support? Do you want advice? Or do you want me to just listen? And I do it every single time in every one of my videos. And the feedback is, I've never thought about this. Or my parents will always just assume that I want advice, and they'll go right past my emotions, or vice versa. They will only focus on my emotions, and then I'm still left with no tasks to move me forward. And I think that it's so amazing that we can take these therapeutic processes and these things that we spend years learning in school and just provide it to you in these really unique, relatable ways that are actually action-oriented. It's not, words that you read and you think, what does this actually look like or sound like? And it's real examples on film by professionals saying, this is what we've been trained to do, and this is how you actually help somebody, because you don't know them. We know that we don't know our clients better than they do. And the thing is no one in this room knows you better than you do. And it's so important, I think, for communication in general, for parents to realize that too, and kids to parents as well, is keep an open mind and know that we're all individuals. And yeah, you can find these things online just in real form now. But I never liked reading. I'm such a visual person, and so it's not even like diagrams and graphs now. It's like real people interacting and showing, this is how you show respect, this is how you show compassion, this is how you engage in real curiosity. And curiosity really is a solution to so much of the divide that we see interpersonally and societally.
And what a great way to support the growing independence that we want students to have over these 4 years. What they need now might be different than what they need another time, and for them to be able to articulate that, I can see that as a real growth edge for a lot of the students who we might get at 18. By the time they graduate, they're 22. We want them to change throughout those 4 years. So how can parents help encourage that too? So I really like that. So one of the situations on TikTok that I saw was when the therapist and the client were talking about highly functional anxiety and depression. And I was wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit, because I think that we probably have a lot of Colgate students that could fit into those categories. So could you talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what she's referring to is the term high functioning. And I have to say it can be used to kind of imply that someone doesn't need as much support, mainly in it's used for high-functioning autism, and there's been a lot of controversy there. But in general, it's used high-functioning depression, high-functioning anxiety. What does that mean? That you don't look like anything's wrong with you. You look fine. But you're so anxious, and you know that your anxiety could really debilitate your life to the point where you've learned to manage it so well that when something does happen, people are like, what is wrong with you? What happened? You were fine. It's like, actually, I've never been fine. I've been masking this whole time. And I think that that's really important for people to realize is as we continue to destigmatize mental health, there's still many conversations that aren't happening. There's still many things that are really uncomfortable for anybody to talk about out loud, even to admit to themselves, let alone share with their parents. And I think that it's really important to remember that just because you look fine on the outside does not mean that you're fine on the inside. And honestly, that's one of the huge factors that involves people taking their own lives. They do it, and people go, I had no idea. And it's because it was scary for them to talk about, or they didn't feel like they would be supported. And so that's another reason why these types of conversations are so important, and this awareness that we really don't know what's under the surface. And it's not only therapists that need to dig under there. We all do.
And as a high-functioning, anxious person myself, I think that what a lot of high-functioning, anxious people don't do is I've gotten this far being anxious, so they don't deal with their anxiety as a separate entity that needs to be. I've always made it. I've always gotten through this anxiousness, so I don't need to deal with that piece. And what happens is you get where you're going, and you're absolutely joyless when you get there. Because for every win, every day of a win, there was a year of, oh my God, I'm dying tomorrow. So just because you're high, if you're high functioning and anxious, still deal with that piece of anxiousness so you can be joyful even as you attain. And there are things that you can do every day, from working out, from putting things, are you worrying, are you working, used to be my screensaver. There used to be, I used to have a list, don't call these people, or what are you doing over, there's every day, in every way, I'm always obligated to fight how I feel. And if you can figure out how you feel, and you can just try little things, and I nudge it here, and then you can nudge it there, and nudge it somewhere else, you can push, and you call somebody, but every day you should do something to fight that anxiety. And that will turn up not only in enabling you to get where you're going, but to actually smile once you arrive.
I like to add a piece that is like maybe a little bit unconventional, which is I like when people can consider therapeutic services when nothing seems to be wrong at all, or they're not having anxiety or depression. Like just for the sake of really learning yourself better, for the sake of elevating your life for professional development, because you're coming into a space where there's a lot more expectation of you. And the 5 months that you used to have to write a paper, now you have 5 days to do that, right? And you want to know, well, how do I manage through this so that I don't get anxious, so that I don't get depressed, so that I don't get down and out on myself because I didn't perform in the ways that I'm accustomed to performing when I was in high school, right? So, I think it's also a matter of like proactive kind of action rather than reactive action when it comes to our mental health. So that's something to consider too, and for the parents in the room to also maybe nudge, your kids to want to participate in services. Sorry to overwhelm your. Caroline's got her line down, I know it. Nothing's wrong, but I'm here, But it's important.
No, I think that's actually great. I love that. And it's actually one of the things we had talked about, whether or not you have advice or guidance for students or families who, so many of the students that are here have spent their entire high school career checking all the boxes. They had to get good grades. They had to be the captain of the team. They had to be the president of the club. They had to do all of that to get here. And now that they're here, failing a test feels like that they're a failure, that they have failed. And it's one moment, it's one thing. How do we help students and parents navigate that, recognizing that that they're not a failure, that it's a single moment, and I think, you talking about the fact that this is a completely different world now, and learning to navigate that differently too.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because especially when you're a student, and when being a student has been the most important identity that you've held for the entirety of your life until this point, then everything that's attached to that is where your value proposition is. That's where your worth is placed for the most part, right? So it's pretty tricky. But I think doing actual exercises that counter that idea of I am a failure can be really helpful for parents and students, right? Actually writing down what you're thinking, what you're going through, and what thoughts are going through your mind. Like, I am a failure, I suck, I'm so dumb, like all of those things, and then countering that with the facts of the entirety of your life, right? Were you not in AP classes for the last 2 years of high school? You kind of were, so you're pretty brilliant, right? So maybe you're not dumb. Maybe we can actually do a pros and, what do we call it? Like just a list of two, one thought and one challenge, right? To just add some depth to the ways that you're thinking rather than it being just one way of thinking. And that can really open up the mind. And I think that especially when parents are talking to their kids, when they're calling you and they're like, I failed the midterm. This is an exercise that you can do with them. And you can say, well, let's sit down and really think about all the ways that you've performed throughout your entire collegiate experience. Has it sucked? No, but we have this one incident, and that one incident does not determine who you are as a student or as a person. And so I think it's about, doing that.
So I'm wondering if you could, anyone who's interested, just talk a little bit about relationships and relationship building in new environments, and how we can support students to make healthy decisions around relationships while they're really trying to meet a lot of people and fit in and all those kinds of things. I'm just wondering if you could talk for a moment about healthy relationships, what those look like, and maybe any signs when things aren't healthy, and I'm talking about romantic, but also friendships, and what to do during those times.
We know how much you know about
I
relationships.
mean, I don't really feel like I can answer this with any value. Can't do it. I got nothing.
Maybe we'll come back to you because
I think I've heard a couple things that I feel like you have more.
Yeah.
And we're gonna come back around to you because I've heard some things.
But in terms of I think you do. I'm gonna nudge and come back to you. You said nudge, right? Earlier you were like nudge, right? But in terms of relationships, I think the most important consideration for all of the relationships that you're going to be building throughout this journey is to remember to have a relationship with yourself that is healthy and that is grounded, and that you can make time for that relationship with yourself, that you can have self-love practices inside of your day as well, affirmations in the mirror, that you can write love letters to yourself, that you can say, hey, you're doing so great, in a journal entry, that you can do a little something for yourself like that. Little chocolate that you like, at the end of the week, just say, you know what, that dark chocolate has my name on it because I've done so well and I love myself. And then just do those things to have a healthy relationship with yourself. And that's going to determine also the foundation of the relationships that you have with everybody else.
I love that. And I think so when I first started my platform, I actually made fun of the advice that you just gave because, and it's so important and necessary, but I made fun of it because when I was young, I'm like, there is no way that I'm writing I love you to myself on a mirror. I think it's crazy. And now I do that. But I think it's important, sometimes those tips don't stick, at least for people that were similar to the way that I was when I was in college. And the way that really helped me grasp it was to realize that it's actually making changes in my brain. Even if you don't feel it in the beginning when you're reading what you're writing in your journal or on your mirror, it might not have an effect in the beginning because you might not have that pathway in your body or your brain to actually take that in and hear it. It's going to take repetition for you to really integrate it. And so I just encourage to not make fun of the advice and to not ignore it and to be consistent with it, because that's what the brain and body wants. That's what it thrives off of. It's very similar to an algorithm. It doesn't really know if what it's doing is helping you. It only is making the decisions that it needs to keep itself going. And you have to feed yourself in that exact same way. And it's going to take a lot of time. And I think another thing I'll say that's similar to that is sometimes we can give up on the coping skills that we may be taught, whether it's through TikTok videos or in actual counseling, because they don't seem to work in the moment when you really need them. And it's just like exercising your muscles or your body. You're not going to go into a competition and try to lift up 50 pounds. I don't know if that's a lot, it is for me. Without trying at all in the beginning. You would practice and you'd get that muscle ready for when you needed it. And coping skills apply the same way. You should be doing them regularly. And maybe that'll lead you towards a more healthy lifestyle, which is not a bad thing. It's important if you know that you have panic attacks and you don't practice your coping skills for those panic attacks ahead of time, they're probably not going to work because your body is in a completely different state and you need to build those systems. So keep that in mind, whether it's writing something on your journal, on your mirror, whether that's practicing breathing, whether that's engaging in massages or yoga or running or whatever it is. Do it repetitively and it will become sustainable. There's no other way that our human bodies work.
I do this a lot with students around gratitude too. I think that when people are sort of in a downward spiral, just being able to look up and say, wow, the leaves are gorgeous today. It might feel like a small thing to them, but I was really confronting a student yesterday who was so down and had a hard time thinking of anything good that had happened to her yesterday. So I said, no, we're actually going to list these things. And every day until I see you again, you're going to list a couple things. They might be small things, but it's the wiring of the brain and being able to pause and be mindful in the moment that students aren't always taught to do. Because it's go, 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 perform, perform, perform. And, I need to be better, better, instead of what's really here right now. And I do think that this conversation helps us think about relationships too, and the respect that we give ourselves, so we're going to demand from other people as well. So.
And I think that reminded me of the one thing I would say about relationships. I would say that about almost everything, is to get perspective, to step away from it, because you can get consumed, you can get pulled into the phone, you can get pulled into a dude, you can get pulled into a chick, and it's like, but if you back up and globalize your pain quotient, I failed that test, that fool dumped me, I can't find my this, but I'm not hungry, because there are millions of people who are. And I'm not saying, just, enjoy what I have, but just back up and get perspective on because when you have problems, you focus on the solutions to the exclusion of all else, and your world becomes that problem. But if you back up and focus and get perspective, then everything seems more manageable, And you can back up and say, is this relationship, is he adding to me? Or is he an issue? But I love him, don't matter. Is he adding to me? Or you can tell I'm a chick, but you know what I'm saying. That's what I tell people, is to get perspective on everything, including your relationships, because sometimes you can get so committed to the proposition of remaining in a friendship or a love relationship, you forget that the point of coming here was to get a degree and go elsewhere and not remember his name.
I want to add something about relationships. I'm sure that you've experienced this too. One of the fascinating things that happen in therapy sessions is that people cannot stand silence. They get so uncomfortable. Like, okay, am I supposed to say something? Why is she not? Is she just staring at me? And it's very important to realize that silence is very uncomfortable. The world is moving faster and faster and faster and faster with technology, and it's hard for us to take a deep breath to begin with, let alone pause in the middle of a conversation. And I think that that's a very helpful tool for all the parents and really everyone in this room and the children. Pause, active listening. Often we have even definitions of words that are different than, like when I say, like, I had a good day, Mariel probably means, when she says she has a good day, it means something different. And so that's, again, where the curiosity comes in, and the pausing, and the reflecting. So like a lot what we learn in therapy is somebody says something to you, and then you rephrase it, and reflect it back to them to make sure that you've heard them correctly, before you just move on and give them the response that you think it is that they want to hear. So I would encourage you to consider that as well, is how uncomfortable is the silence between you and whoever it is that you're talking to? How long can you pause to really integrate what it is that they said? And do you really know what they said? And do you need to ask more questions? Communication gets really tricky, and we communicate a lot online more than in person, and over the phone for parents and kids when the kids are away. And so pause, get curious, reflect back, and remember, ask them, what is it that you're looking for?
It makes me think of help me understand. Right. Yeah. Asking the question, help me understand. And something Dawn and I talked a little bit about is we're sort of at this age, we miss the car rides. The car rides used to be the best place to talk to the kids. They were in the back. They didn't have to make eye contact. They would talk about anything, everything. So sometimes you might have to institute the car ride again too, I think might be, or help us find the virtual version of the car ride that we can pull back out and learn how to use. Would be great.
So I'm wondering, there's a topic that we haven't touched on too much here yet, is trauma. And we're seeing in our data nationally, but also at Colgate, that a lot of students come to Colgate having already endured a trauma. And trauma can come in so many different forms. But I was wondering if we could talk a little bit more about multi-generational trauma and just sort of understand that a little bit more, because I think that that's a concept that is newer to a lot of people. And I know that you've talked a lot about that, but just wondering if anyone here might talk about that more.
Yes, absolutely. Happy to. I think we all have a perspective to share, but from the clinical perspective, intergenerational trauma is a type of trauma that's handed down. So basically, when a parent lives in a very stressed body and for a very long period of time, so chronically stressed, chronically traumatized, meaning that they experienced the trauma in their lives, it wasn't really resolved, and so just as Dr. Courtney mentioned, our brains, our nervous system, our cells inside of our bodies, they all register that we're in a traumatized body. And so they actually change, almost like a mutation, to actually register that we're in trauma. And when we actually procreate, we hand down those genes to our children. And they then exist in a body that is very hypersensitive to emotions. So they experience big emotions. So if you ever had the kid that was a little bit harder to calm down and to soothe, then it probably gives you a little bit of an insight as to whether or not they had big emotions and maybe the kinds of sensitivities that you had by way of your experiences as a parent were likely transmitted down. And so we have that, which is, I think it's sometimes a little bit hard for parents to even digest, and I can understand why, because it's like, whoa, what, right? But it doesn't mean that automatically a child is traumatized. It just means that they're a little bit more on the highly sensitive side. And then when they experience anything in their lifetime, whether it's bullying or if it's, a bad breakup or any kind of trauma themselves, then their trauma gets activated, even more profoundly so. And then we have the generational transmission of trauma. So that's in essence what it is. And so, I think there's a lot that can be done, because I think mostly parents are always like, well, what do we do? Right? How can we help? Because, there's a lot of trauma in the world, and we just went through a global crisis that was traumatizing to many of us, and especially those of us that already had sensitivities. And it's a lot of the things that I like to think about doing proactively. It's, when we talk about breathing is an exercise that's not just done to calm you down. Breathing is done to actually restructure your brain, your nervous system, and your cells to actually be more in a more eased and calmed state on a regular basis, so that then you can ease whatever is being triggered, and you don't have to exist in a body that's on fire. The same goes with a lot of the techniques that we do, including something like journaling, putting your thoughts down on paper and letting the paper have your worries, and not letting those worries just stir up in your mind and increase your emotional sensitivity. It's all of those things that we can do on a continuous basis to really break those cycles. Because, to be honest, a lot of parents, even my generation, but most certainly my parents' generation and beyond, a lot of people just didn't have access to these mental health tools. They didn't have, people were meeting in chapels not for this reason, right? This is very unique. And so because they didn't have those tools, they probably didn't have what they needed in order to not transfer a lot of those sensitivities over. But you now have them. You have the tools, you have access to them, you have access to services that are free. And so if you don't want to necessarily exist in a body that feels like it's always on fire and activated, then a lot of what can be done is just to do a lot of those practices, but not as a reactionary practice, but as you wake up in the morning and you wake up 5 minutes earlier and you do 5 minutes of breathing every single day. And like Dr. Courtney said, it takes repetition. To be frank, it takes about 300 repetitions. But if you think about that, it's just a year. It's a year of your life that you can dedicate to breathing every single day and actually restructure your brain, your nervous system, and your cells. And that's pretty miraculous.
One of the things I would say that if a student is worried for whatever reason about seeking formal counseling is a lot of these practices, like we said, could be accessed online, but I also think about some of the yoga classes that we offer and some of the other places that as we think about our community involvement with mental health awareness and support, it's not only the counseling center, student health services, Shaw Wellness, but very broadly, students can access these things in a lot of ways. There's some gorgeous trails right up the hill that I think are underutilized. I'll go for a walk sometimes and not see one other person up there. But what a great place to do some of that breathing and just taking in some of nature, because I think that that's another way to reset and just take care of our bodies. So.
And proactively, like right now, it's like the best time to do that because the winter is coming and everyone's seasonal affective disorder is going to get kicked out, right? So it's like, this is the time to really like offset your body, but in the positive direction rather than just letting the winter come and then the blues come, right? Like there are things that you can proactively do to try and make sure that it's not as tough of a season as it can be.
Okay, well, we're coming right up about 2 o'clock, and I wanted to switch gears and just see if there's any questions from anyone here in the audience for anybody up here on stage. I think that we might have collected some on the way in, but we also have these microphones up here, or if you want to project your voice real loud, you're welcome to, from your seat, ask any questions that you might have. Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, sounds great.
Hi there, my name's Mickey. First of all, thank you very much for being here. I think this is phenomenal. Thanks to Colgate, but thank you for making the time. I think one of my greatest takebacks really was actually from you because I totally believe that making room for therapeutic services when you are not in crisis, learning coping skills before you enter a crisis is such a valuable tool, and I think we should all integrate that in high schools through wellness programs or even in health class curriculums, how to enter therapy and learning some coping skills. We are not born with coping skills, we have to learn them, and I think that would be a great time to obtain those skills. My question is a little bit more of a general question. We are in a mental health crisis in the United States. You all have 1,000 gazillion million followers, so that's why I'm directing the question to you. A lot of health insurance services, health insurance companies, unfortunately still to this day, are rather selective in what kind of treatments they are contributing, covering. Some are not at all covered. I guess I'm wondering on your thoughts what we as a society can do in the United States to change that sentiment for health insurance and also make it more affordable for different income brackets. As you mentioned, you are expensive. So, which is, I'm not saying that you only get the top of the best therapist for the highest amount of money. I'm not saying that, but what do you think, with all of your million followers, with having a vocal voice globally or at least nationally, what we as a society can do to make, mental health treatment much more accessible and better covered by health insurance?
I think one of the things that we can do is to make sure that the powers that be, the politicians, both locally, because I've had these fights locally with politicians on the county side, how expensive failing to deal with mental health is. I mean, if you haven't figured out that these crises will kill you after Uvalde and all, I don't know what you're looking at. I belong to an organization called Bloom 365, and we go into schools to actively talk to children about their emotionality. And in at least 2, we got lists from those kids who they were going to kill. It's everywhere. So there has to be a constant effort on our part to push to the powers that be, because the insurance company ain't going to do it. Ain't no upside in it. But the powers that be to require that kind of parity for mental health and physical health, because it is extraordinarily expensive. We are slowly creeping towards that because my insurance covers more of my stuff now than it used to. But we're on our way, but we got to keep hollering.
Insurance companies are my demise. So I own treatment centers, and insurance has to cover these higher levels of care. And when I first got into the field, the clinical field, for 4.5 years, I was the person that was between the client and the insurance company before I opened my own practice. And so I would have to gather all the clinical information, fight with therapists and doctors that were on the insurance side that would just deny for no reason. They would say, well, call me again when they try to take their life. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, how can that actually be a valid response to the information that I'm giving you right now? So I completely understand that it's a serious issue. And I've had that fight too with them, and I've really threatened most insurance companies at this point for the benefit of my clients. And I think, even when I was getting my dissertation, I wrote it on the fact that we needed new interventions for substance use disorders. And one of the professors and doctors that were deciding whether or not I should be a doctor asked me if I ever thought that insurance companies would cover these interventions that I studied. And I thought it was an incredible question and a really upsetting question for the state that we're in, that I could come up with all of this information to vastly shift the way that we treat very serious addiction in this country. And I was asked whether are people even going to pay for it? How are they even going to get it? And so I think, and another, I'll just say this because I think it's important. At the end of every year, treatment centers will get a refund if the insurance company makes more than X percentage of profit. It's billions of dollars, and they only give back a couple thousand. It is insane, and I think that actually this Generation Z and younger, we're not going to take it anymore. Our health is important, and obviously there's this battle going on politically as well of what is the best solution to this, but I think it's something that we're all really aware of. We all get those bills, and we're like, why is this so much money? I didn't think it was going to be this much. One thing that is good is we're starting to move more towards at least understanding how much the totality of any treatment or therapy will be. So now, and if this isn't happening for you, it's something for you to be aware of. It's called the good faith estimate, and you have to be informed of how much they think your total treatment will be and how much insurance will cover it. And it's at the point now where if the insurance won't and it's over a certain amount, they are not allowed to charge you for it. And so we're moving more towards understanding that these services are necessary and that insurance companies are a barrier to it. And I would say probably over the next 10 to 20 years, which is the best years of our life coming up now, regardless of what age we are, it's going to be unfortunate to not have that shift happen immediately. But I do think that we're headed in that direction. And yeah, it's going to be on the political level, but it's also going to be on the ground level too. It's going to be people finding new ways to offer these resources. And the destigmatization of mental health really plays a role in that. It's not even that we need to go to therapy when there isn't anything wrong. We need to open up therapeutic conversations in our community. We need to be preventing the things that these insurance companies aren't even covering. And so prevention is going to play a huge role in the future as well. And I think that's where our society is headed, is to prevent the downfall and the discrimination and the detriment of just human beings that are alive today.
Two action points that I would add very quickly is just we can all lobby. I know that a lot of my colleagues, they would go to Albany and lobby for different reasons, and I'd be like, why are we going there from the city? Because we would be at Columbia University. I'm like, Albany. But it's very important, right? And so anyone can lobby on behalf of mental health parity and different, mental health benefits. And, I think in addition to that, I forgot my other point. Wait, it was in reference to something you said. Darn, I forgot. But, you can at least advocate on that end, but yeah.
Another question.
Great.
And I think this could have been asked probably many times by many folks on this campus, and it is this. What advice do you have for people who feel a lot of shame around having mental health struggles?
Well, I think I'll start with this one. I am diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and it's one of the or the highest stigmatized condition. Essentially what it is every unhealthy negative response that you could have to something bad happening in your life, I have at times 1,000, or have had at times 1,000. completely unable to control my emotions, bad interpersonal relationships, suicidality, self-harm, violence onto other people. And I'm sitting here today in none of those ways anymore. And I live my life with so much shame, and that's why I show up the way that I do. It's honestly going to make me emotional a little because it can feel so shameful. It can feel embarrassing. You can feel weak. You can feel different or made fun of, or, I don't want to be around you. You're giving me anxiety, And I think what's important to realize is that every mental health symptom, almost every mental health symptom, happens because your body and mind are trying to protect you. There's a reason. I'm sure maybe you've heard your emotions are messengers. Listen to your body, listen to your mind. But truly, they're trying to tell you something. We get anxious because we're overwhelmed. We get anxious because our systems are fueled with norepinephrine and cortisol, and these are signs that we need to take care of ourselves. They're not signs that there's something wrong with us. Because actually, your body's functioning the way it should be. When you experience PTSD or dissociation, it's because your body is trying to keep you alive in those moments. The issue is that it keeps trying to keep you alive in those ways when you no longer need to be taken care of in that way. So you're actually just being taken care of, just in the wrong way. It's not that something is wrong with you. And also, you can do things, even if you do have serious mental health issues. And that's why I show up. The amount of times I've heard people say that they didn't think they could be a therapist because they had mental health issues, I say, has your doctor never gotten sick? Has your lawyer never been sued? Well, maybe not. Not as common. And so that's just important to realize. You're not the only one. Everyone is at risk of having these issues. And so please, you're just human. Life is hard. It's really freaking hard. And we aren't given a rule book for it. And oftentimes the rule book that we are given through the experiences that we have are how to avoid things that are scary and how to do whatever our parents or society or our partner tells us to do. You have individual abilities to heal, and you have individual abilities to develop coping skills that aren't so healthy, but we are all in this. We all have mental health, and we all have the potential to have mental illness as well. So just, if you do feel ashamed, I'm here too, and I get it, and it will get better, and you'll find your people.
I feel like you shouldn't be ashamed because there's nothing to be ashamed of. Someone gave me a book called First Rate Madness. I don't know read it. He gave it to me because he thought I was a little off. But he talked about all the leaders in history and their peculiar abilities were also associated with peculiar disabilities. And I honestly believe that which is wrong with me, and there's a lot, I have issues, I got problems, but what it shorts me on one side, it gifts me on the other. I have capacities born in my mental health issues that have allowed me to do what I do. I am from a father who was far more mentally ill than me, also far smarter than me, but he was born in 1919 in the backwoods of West Virginia and died a millionaire. You can't do that if you're regular. He took his mental illness and whoops them behind with it. So all I'm saying is figure out what your thing is, and whatever it is, shore up the bad stuff it does to you, and live well on the good stuff. Thelonious Monk was out of his mind, but look at that music. And you don't have that Thelonious thing over there, but you know what I mean? It evens out. It evens out. Own it, love it, tell your neighbors about it. It's fine.
Can I say the thing that I remembered? So can I just perfect. So one thing that a lot of people don't know about is that I know that it can feel scary to go to a hospital for whatever reasons, right? But every major large hospital system has a mental health clinic within it. My almost all of my training, and also where I did my first years of work was at Columbia University Medical Center. And there we have a psychiatry clinic, a mental health clinic that is open to everyone. And it is a self-pay clinic, and usually we take about $5 to $7 a session at most, if anything. Sometimes we don't charge anything. And a lot of the major hospital systems have these clinics within them, but most people think, I want to see a therapist, and they think like it's like some one person out there, rather than there's a lot of ways to see a therapist and a lot of places that have access, but we just don't, kind of globalize that access or talk about it enough. So I think that that's one piece that I just want to say around where there already is a place where people can go. I mean, the services are here, right? But I think for anybody who maybe is a parent who, is thinking about services for themselves, there's so many services that are available out there that aren't like $250 a session, but something much more affordable.
And I just wanted to add something about what we were talking about earlier about advocacy. I would love for people to advocate for mental health resources at the younger years, because by the time somebody gets to college, they've had 17, 18 years behind them, and a lot of time that they could have developed some of these skills. So, I know some teachers down in our school district here practice mindfulness with their students, and I just love hearing about those kinds of things, but I just know it's not done enough. I know we're also trying to find better mental health resources within schools. There might be a satellite clinic that's in a school, because students go to school. It's one place to find them. And if it takes a half hour out of their day to go see, a really well-educated counselor who can help them with some of this skill building, I would like to see it there, so that by the time students are coming to us, they already know. They already have their toolbox with some of their tools that need to be refined. But where we're at now is a lot of times students come to us and say, I've been sort of waiting to see a counselor until I could find one, and we're building their toolbox. Happy to do that, but it sure would be nice to refine and add to an already developed toolbox.
To add to that point in terms of advocacy, New York State now requires a social emotional learning curriculum within the pre-K through 12 schools. So if there is anybody interested in advocacy and your state is not doing that, that is another way to sort of put some pressure out there and provide some advocacy, because it's a really great way to start from the very beginning, and help children develop those skills that they can then carry with them. So
we do have the time for a couple more questions if anybody has any more questions for us.
All right, I have a comment.
Great.
So I work in an ER, and one thing that bothers me is when I see kids coming, and the ER where I work is we don't really have a mental health facility per se. They just come in to be transferred to a bigger mental health facility. And it perturbs me when I see kids come in like 10, 12, 9, want to commit suicide, etc. And I don't need a mic, I have a big voice. Oh, sorry. Hi. So I was saying that I work in an ER, and it so happened that we've seen a lot of various ages of people coming in with mental health, but what perturbs me is when kids come in, 9, 10, 11, 12, etc., wanting to commit suicide, etc. But there was one incident where this 10-year-old came in, and he had a long list of meds. And when things happen like that, that's what prompted me actually to pursue a degree in applied behavior analysis, which I'm finishing up, but I also want to add psychology to that, health medical psychology, I'm looking into that. And it so happened that I was speaking to the mother, and she had 3 other kids. And while I was speaking, a fellow co-worker came in and told me that the doctor said I must get the names of the other kids. And I'm wondering why. And then when I went back, the doctor said, oh, hi, my secret agent, what are their names? And I'm like, why do I need to do that? And he was thinking about calling, I forgot the name of the company where they would take away the kids.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're on your own with that. I'm not doing that. Because the mother explained to me that the father died in front of them from natural causes. And because of that, That's why they were acting out, especially this 10-year-old. So my thing is, find out what happened before taking away the lady's kids. I told him, no, you're on your own. So with things like that, if you have people trying to take away your kids instead of helping you, the situation that you're in, how would you deal with that, right? And another thing, because I have all kind of questions when you're talking about, I'm not going to get a chance to say to ask what she's saying. But another thing too is that this week I learned from a hospitalist at my ER is that doctors are now committing suicides. People in internships, what do you call them? Residencies, etc., are committing suicide. How do you deal with that? So it's not just high schoolers, it's kids, etc. And that's why I said that prompted me to pursue what I'm pursuing. Because I don't like to see that kids being left with a paper trail or being given medicine. There has to be another way to deal with the situation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. I just want to let you remind me that one of the best things I've learned, and it was through a school board training, was when you're looking at someone and thinking, what the heck is wrong with you? Change the question to what the heck happened to you? And I think that fits the family you're talking exactly. And it has really helped me to reshape my perspective on a lot of situations. So thank you for sharing your experience and your passion, and thank you for getting more training.
The system is broken, and we're trying really hard to fix it, as every human, right? I think really kind of has to dip their hands in there, and try and fix it. This whole calling CPS on families has been a very long-standing issue in a lot of institutions, educational institutions, hospitals, and a lot of it goes right back to, people just don't know how to deal with crisis in a humanizing way, and to really look at the person that's in front of them and wonder about their story. And, a lot of physicians aren't necessarily trained, all of us in the medical field, we're just not trained, even psychologists, to really sit down with a person's story in a way that allows them to feel more humanized and more seen and to feel helped. What even us, we're actually trained to mobilize crisis in that way when we see that something might be off in the family unit that could be impacting a child. And so I think it's a part of also what we need to do as far as training, what we need to do as far as also lobbying, right, for the rights of families. So that's I think it's a big issue. It's got a lot of legs. So I hear you on that, and I think on my end, a lot of what I used to do when I worked at the hospital was to literally, I would show my face in the ER. I would be there with my patients. I would advocate on behalf of them. I would show them how to advocate on their own behalf. And unless I thought that a child was truly and deeply in danger and that I needed to mobilize a crisis action on behalf of that child in order to protect them from a family unit that could put them in danger in any kind of way, what I would do was to mobilize instead the help that the family needed. And I think that that's kind of the perspective that we need. I'll let others speak to other pieces, but I just wanted to add that.
Just a couple of things I wanted to jump in with. One is how you shared that doctors are dying by suicide too, and I think that this speaks to how important destigmatizing across the board mental illness is, because it affects everybody in different ways, and this whole society has been through a lot over the last couple of years, and it's touched different people differently. But I think that that's important. We come together here to talk about college students, but it's a whole community we really need to be talking about. And I think the more we're talking about, the more we open up our eyes to all the different ages and all the different levels, the more we destigmatize to the mental health piece. So I think that's important. Another thing that, as far as thinking about the Colgate campus and some of the things that we offer, we have a number of therapy groups that are going any given week. We have about 13 to 15 different therapy groups. And as far as being proactive, it's a really great place for students to take advantage of a small peer group and a trained psychologist or a mental health therapist to talk through different things and to develop some skills. So I run one called Stress and Anxiety Management, and it covers a lot of the different things that we've been talking about here, that students don't have to have a diagnosed anxiety disorder to come to that group. And actually, we don't diagnose at the counseling center because we don't need to. We look at symptoms and what we're treating students based on their symptoms. So if you can encourage people to take a look at those sort of proactive measures, I think that that could be really helpful. Also, I've had a number of conversations with students who are going to graduate and thinking about where they're going to work and what the balance is going to be like once they graduate. A lot of students want that high-paying job that is going to take so much of their life. I understand that, but where's the balance? So what kinds of insurance plans do those companies carry? And I think those kinds of things are really important to think about as students are leaving college, is not necessarily only about what's your salary going to be, but also what's your balance going to be like? What do you want your life to be like? And then what kind of salary can support that? And looking at that more in a holistic way rather than sort of only one piece of the bigger puzzle.
I think something I would add is, as we are moving more towards this destigmatized culture of mental health, sure, there's going to be people that are just not willing to put mental health first primarily, but I think that one of the issues with a doctor just wanting to go right ahead and take the children away is it's not second nature to think about mental health first. It's actually second nature now to completely ignore it. And so I think as we continue to destigmatize, it will be more of a thought before an action is made, and I think it will come with time. I really think that we're going to slow down. As much as technology is going to increase, I think humanity is going to slow down and try to make better choices. And I can see a lot of that in this generation already. It's just, do I want to do this? Do I know everything I need to know before I make this choice? And I think it would have been great for the doctor to pause for a moment, get curious, and make sure that there was compassion there and understanding. And yeah, just realizing that we're all similar. That doctor probably doesn't think about, or they probably don't think about their mental health. If they did, like for me, that'd be the first thing I thought about. The first thing to look into. And so it really is about a perspective shift and a prioritization of, humanizing the person that's in front of you and breaking down those barriers between doctor and patient and realizing this is just another person. This isn't a patient, this is a person. And they have a whole life. And I think that the more that we are able to realize that through this destigmatization, hopefully those decisions won't be made so abruptly and so unnecessarily. And I'm glad that it wasn't made, which is great.
I would also add to the piece about, the clinicians and residents, either attempting or completing suicide. I think that that goes for, anybody who is, perceived to be, the strong person, right? Or the one that's got it together, or the one that's, got these, accolades, or the students that are pre-med, right? Or the ones that are, always in the library, or, really, into their studies in a way that maybe there's no other room for other things. I think always checking in on that person is really essential, because for those doctors and residents, the ways that they have to go about achieving those accolades, a lot of people don't know how much goes into that. It's a lot. It's a lot. And especially, for those that hold specific identities, there's a lot of imposter syndrome, there's a lot of isms that happen inside of those institutions that hold these people back, or a lot of ways in which there's barriers that don't allow them to get to the next level. They may not get the residency that they desired, or there's something that's happening institutionally that's really putting a lot of pressure on them. And you got to think about what happens with these people. Everybody goes to them and says, help me, but nobody goes to them and says, how can I help you? And how are you doing? Right? And that happens also with the strong friend or the strong people. How are you doing? No, really, but really, I'd like to know, right? And I think that that's a question that we can just kind of open up to the people that show up strongly or high functioning in our lives.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for doing this panel. I actually work at Colgate, and I work with the parents of current students. So I get the phone calls often from the parent who's saying, I've been talking to my student and I'm concerned. It's scary for them. When they're not here, they're hundreds or thousands of miles away, and they know their student is struggling, but they're not quite sure what's going on. Sometimes the student calls and they're maybe venting about or concerned about or upset about something, and it's really not about that. It's something else. So I guess my question for you all is, do you have tips for parents when they are hearing from their students where they sound like they're troubled and they can't really discern what's really going on, but they know something's wrong? How to have that conversation where they can kind of figure out, it's sort of back to that question, do you need my support, my advice, or do you just want me to listen? But deeper than it, like when they really think there's something wrong, they don't know how to have that conversation. What advice would you have for them on that front? And maybe a part two, because it's also about how students can support each other. If students are expressing to their parents that they have other students in their circle that are in trouble, you know, how can parents talk to their students about how to help them navigate relationships where they maybe need to support their peers around them?
You know, I've had 6 sons. The baby is 27, so I've had those conversations a great deal. One of the things that I found assisted me was I ain't gonna get mad because I'm always their parent. So they're going to limit the information that they give me because I know that that's some stuff I wouldn't want them to do. But if you tell them up front, I'm not going to get mad. You can tell me anything. You know, if I'm upset about something I did with some guy and I'm not sure this or that, but I wouldn't want to tell my mother because she would have told me not to do with some guy. You know, so you make sure that you know that you're not being judgmental and that you hear them. Talk to them more frequently when they're not upset and in trouble. Just, you know, pop in and say hi and what's happening and what are you doing and be laughing. And also when they tell you stuff, you know, hide your real reaction in the beginning. You know, let it swarm over you, and then so you don't respond with, oh my God, because I want to rush, I want to fix it. Oh, why did you do that? All of that. Just let that first wave pass you by and be that non-judgmental individual. Now you can get to the judgment later on, but you walk into it easily. You got to make sure you know where they are and don't anticipate what they're going to say. Everybody thinks they know what the other person's about to tell them based on who they used to be, who they were, how they acted, and what you think is going on. You know, be a blank slate in that regard. Do not presume you know where they're headed. You may, but they don't even know that.
I would add, you know, if the conversation is going something like, oh my gosh, this happened, underneath it all, there's worry. Underneath it all, there's anxiety. You can, as a parent, just point out the emotion, because I think oftentimes you get entangled in the what's happening and you want to know the details. In therapy, we do this thing, especially in group therapy, where there's something called content, what people are saying, and process. What you, as a psychologist, you're like kind of like a fly on the wall, you're looking at the group. What's happening to these people? What's the general temperament of the group? What's the emotion that's being passed around? And that's what you want to be mindful of, is like, what is my child experiencing as far as emotions right now? Let me take that and reflect it back to them. You seem worried to me, right? It's the emotion. And so when you reflect that piece, it changes and it shifts the conversation. And it can actually get to a place that may be a little bit more productive.
I think one thing I would add is, that was perfect. I would add that your kids are listening to the way you talk about other people and their problems too. They're seeing the way you react to your sisters and brothers or your friends or your parents. And, you know, actions are different because, you know, somebody could be in a relationship, it could go this way, it could go that way. Everyone's individual, but those underlying emotions are the same. And so they're referencing that. They're seeing that, you know, they're probably anticipating, oh, that person from the outside is probably really distressed or probably really sad or grieving, you know, and if they hear something like, I can't believe that they're not over it already, or I can't believe they're bringing this up again, or I can't believe they did that. They're seeing the judgment towards other people, and it is unconsciously pushing them back. So just something to really think about is they're watching and listening far more than you think they are.
I might comment on the second part of your question. We want to be careful about what students are in charge of with their friends. So students live in close quarters here together and get really tight with groups of friends. So it's understandable that sometimes friends' issues become their friends' issues. However, when they're reaching out to their parents about those things, I think it is important to remind them of healthy boundaries, what they need. There are some students, some people who are more magnets for that because they're helpers. And people who need help find them easily. But that can be quite a burden on themselves too, even though they may never admit it. So something you had said earlier about just like asking that person that's taking care of everybody else, but how are you doing? And then giving them permission to step back. And you're not being a bad friend if you refer this person to a professional. It's always okay to say, hey, I care about you, I love you, but I can't help you the way that you want me to help you. It's taking too much from me and my work. I really want to get you to somebody who can. And I think it's important to give them permission to do that. Sometimes people have the myth that if I do that, I'm not being a good friend. I actually remind people that you're being a better friend because you can't do everything for everybody and you need to take care of yourself in order to take care of other people. So that's one of those ways to kind of reroute people, but I do see that happening a lot. And then students are sometimes taking on almost the babysitting role of another student, and that's just too much for them. They have so much going on here that they need to really get involved into. So.
I want to add, I lived in a fraternity at UCSB when I was going to college. Yes, a fraternity, not a sorority. And I bring this up because these boys lived in very close quarters as well. And one of them ended up taking his life. And the thing is we, after the fact, saw all the signs. After the fact. And I think it's really important to don't be the friend that's going to try to don't take on other people's emotions, but please be aware of the signs. I think it's so important because it is a crisis of people taking their own life. And if we knew the signs, we could have done something to help. And it also goes back to just because they seem like they're fine doesn't mean that they are. And so just, yeah, I mean, protect yourself, but just, you would want your friends to know the signs too, that you weren't wanting to share. And so I just want to encourage that because it can be really life-saving. It's just general information. If you know that you have an EpiPen when someone's having an allergic reaction, or you have now naloxone when someone's having an opioid overdose, it's like you can see these signs and then you know what to do. It's a lot easier. But when it comes to mental health, you can really hide those away. And so I just encourage you to be aware of the signs for yourself and be aware of the signs for your peers, really everyone in this room. It's really something to know, because as much as you don't want to take on someone else's life, I think everyone in this room would be happy to save one.
Okay, well, this has been a really great conversation. I want to thank you all for spending time with me up here. We'll all stick around for a little while in case anybody has a question they want to ask any one of us that they didn't want to ask in the larger group. But I also want to thank you for putting your time into coming here and being part of this today and to really listening and hopefully helping us with destigmatizing mental health issues and really helping people get to the care that they need. So thank you very much.